Well, good morning. We showed you that video because it is an opportunity for you. We are so excited that you're here this morning, first of all, and for those of you that maybe haven't been here before, my name is Jenna Jadens, and I am the Global Outreach Pastor here at Westside. And we have just been so excited thinking and praying and dreaming about these times together because we know that God has something He wants to stir up in you. And so we're expectant of that again this morning. Like I said, that I Heart Treasure Valley is an opportunity for you, perhaps to step out of your comfort zone for the first time, or maybe you've done it before and you know how awesome it is. But Nick Wojcik partners with the Heart Campaign, which was started actually by people out of this church. And we are taking a missions trip to exotic Idaho. So if you're too scared to go across the ocean, go to Idaho. So I'm going to be leading that team, and I just wanted to give you that information that's coming up. And if you would like more information about that, there is our first team meeting will be February 3rd, which is next week, in the adult ed room. So if you're curious or you for sure want to go, be there, please. And that's actually during the 10:45 service, and it won't be too long, so just for that. I just have a quick few announcements, and then we're going to launch into what we have for you this morning. First is if you didn't catch the table outside and signed in and got everything that you need, please make sure you see the table on the way out. Terry would love you for that. And the last thing I have is a really awesome, exciting thing that we have happening here in the month of May, and it is actually for our local and global outreach, and it is a Beyond Silent auction. And I am giving my plea to ask if you would help volunteer, but it's going to be really fun. So we have lots of different areas where you could volunteer, and just to give you a little picture of what it'll look like, I really feel like God's put it on my heart that we need to raise finances so that we can bless the kingdom and bless our community and people around the world. But more than that, I just feel like God's asked us to really create an experience for people so that they feel what we're doing. For me, it's going to be a celebration of what God's allowed us already to do across the world here in our community. And so we're going to be featuring local outreach and global outreach in creative ways. And so we have a creative team that's already dreaming up some pretty awesome things that I won't tell you about yet, but that's happening. There's also opportunities for if you have administrative skills and all that kind of stuff. So again, it's a big undertaking, but I'm super excited about it because I know it's going to allow our church to really feel and see and know exactly what God's already doing, and just inspire people to feel like we do have an extension out from Westside Church beyond our walls. So that's coming up. There's also a sign up if you want more information with that out at the table as well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you Pastor Jim Stevens, and he is going to share with you some awesome foundational things about missions this morning. And if you don't know Jim, he used to serve here as the missions pastor, and he and his wife have served in ministry for years and years, 16 of which were overseas as missionaries. So he is a very wise man. I can tell you that from personal experience, so please welcome him.
A very wise man once told, we got some great stuff to talk about today, and Pastor Steve has some good insights for us as well. So I'm going to jump right into this. I'm going to focus mostly, in this session, I'm going to focus mostly on missions, global missions, but please keep in mind that at Westside Church, we're developing both in the area of global missions and local outreach at the same time with the same leadership team. And I think that's a really, really good thing for us. And I want to give you a thought to keep in the front of your mind while we're talking about developing a missions philosophy. I know that sounds like fairly big words, but when I say developing a missions philosophy, I'm talking about how we think about missions so that we'll know what our role in missions should be. And here's the phrase I want you to keep right in the front of your thinking all the time we're talking about this today. No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. That's true of us as individuals, and it's true of us as a church. No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And so it's important that we figure out what is our thing to do in the plan and purpose of God. Let's talk just for a couple of minutes about the history of missions as we know it. In the 16th, well, no, more like in the 17th and 18th century is when modern missions began to develop. The church existed all down through the Middle Ages, and then came the Age of Enlightenment, and I won't burden you with all of that stuff. But about the time that the nations in Europe, who were at that point, they were the most civilized, the most technologically advanced nations on earth, and they were also the most Christianized nations. And so at about the time that things like sailing ships began to be perfected, and the nations of Europe began to send ships out exploring the world, when they went, they took the message of Christ with them. They took the gospel with them. They took, the Bible was starting to be printed instead of just being handwritten, was starting to be translated into languages. And so when the colonizers went out from Portugal and from Britain and from Spain and from France and from those countries that did the colonization of the world, when they went out to colonize, they took the gospel with them. But because they were the most civilized, the most advanced, and they were mostly going to completely undeveloped countries, they didn't just take the gospel. They also took their culture, and they took their technology, and their motives weren't entirely pure, because they were first and foremost driven by economics, and that doesn't mean that they weren't sincere in doing missions, but they kind of had mixed motives. Well, I have mixed motives too. In fact, C.S. Lewis once said, "I don't believe I've ever done anything from an absolutely pure motive." So all of us, we have to be aware that when we're doing things and we're motivated by a good heart and by the Spirit of God in our heart, there's always some mixture. And so it takes a while. Sometimes it takes a little experimentation to get it right. But what happened with this exporting of culture along with the gospel is we developed a pattern that carried right over into our time. And so, and I'll just tell you this from the experience that Gene and I have had. In the 70s, when we started traveling to the island nation of Jamaica and started ministering in the villages and the towns and the different parishes throughout the jungle part of Jamaica, we'd go to church and we'd find people in church wearing three-piece suits. In the tropics, in the jungle, in incredibly hot weather, and here's these guys didn't feel like they could come to church unless they had on a suit with a vest and a jacket and trousers, and the women had to wear, what was it, Gene?
Long sleeves. Yeah,
long sleeves, and they always had to have a hat on their head and all of that. And it was because when the missionaries went there in the from North America and Canada, from U.S. and Canada, when the missionaries went there and began to represent the different denominations, most of the denominations that existed in the 70s in the U.S. were represented by a mission and sometimes by a small organization in Jamaica. But when the missionaries went, they not only took the gospel of Jesus Christ, they took their clothing styles and their customs. And so people got such a mixture that put such unnecessary bondage on them because it wasn't just simply the pure gospel. When we first started ministering in Uganda in 1997, I think was the first time that I was there, and then we went back just a couple of months after that to lead a conference for the Full Gospel Churches of Uganda, a group of about 600 churches, and it was such a great time. And we introduced our Foundation for Christian Service course there and followed that up with some training for the pastors in using that course. But there was a missionary from Canada that came down, and he was so thrilled. We gave him about a half hour in one of the evening sessions when there were nearly 1,000 pastors and wives and leaders there. We gave him about a half hour to give the gift that he had brought for the African pastors. He had come all the way from Canada with 2 huge suitcases full of ties for the men to wear. And so they had to make a big ceremony of having all these men come forward, and the missionary would hand them a tie and the guy would put it around his neck. I mean, folks, that's just not what it's about. And we're learning that. I mean, I love that about Westside Church, that to us it's not about how you dress, and it's not about whether you're up with the latest styles. It's about the reality of Christ in our lives. And so what I'm saying is, when we do mission, whether it's local outreach or whether it's reaching the furthest places in the world, we have to do some homework. We have to do some heart examination on an individual level and on a corporate level as a church. We've got to be sure that what we're taking is the essence of the good news of Jesus Christ, and not the baggage that comes with our own preferences and customs and practices. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Now, that's an ongoing thing. It's not something that you just have a think about it and then you write down some notes and then you're just good for the rest of your life. It's something that you deal with in every interaction, every time you travel, every communication that you have. And I have to be careful not to tell too many stories, because we need to move on to a couple other things. But I learned a lot about the Bible by our work for 8 years in inner city London, working with African pastors. One of the African pastors that we worked with needed to have a special appointment with Jean and me one day, and so he came to our house and we met and talked, and he needed some counsel and advice about a situation that involved potential conflict between his wife, who lived with him in the adjoining borough in London where we were, and one of his other wives who lived in Ghana, West Africa. And then you think about a scripture where Paul writes to Timothy and Titus and says that an elder in the church must be the husband of one wife. And that doesn't mean much to us, so we try to apply it to, well, divorce or whatever. But it actually, that whole thing was about when people lived in cultures where they had multiple marriages going on at the same time. And Paul said, those people shouldn't be leaders because it produces a conflict that can distract them from their work. And that was this guy's exact situation. Because he was born and grew and lived in a culture where, what's it called? Polygamy. Polygamy was the normal practice. So again, as we deal with people of other cultures, we have to make sure that we're not just trying to see them through our lenses of cultural preconception. We have to look at things that seem a little strange and say, why? Why is that? Why is it thus? And what is the thusness of this thus? So, yeah. All right. So that's one of the things that's I think is a huge thing for all of us to keep in mind. So we said nobody can do everything, but everyone can do something. And we said that we've got to be careful that we're not always looking through the lenses of our own culture when we're trying to influence other people. Because this session is about developing a missions philosophy. This is about thinking through why we do what we do and why we do it the way that we do. So, here are some types of missions ministry. Now we're talking about global missions, but we're also talking about things that relate to local outreach. Here are some types of missions ministry that Christians are involved in. One is humanitarian aid. Humanitarian aid can be medical care, that can be short-term medical care. It can be things like YWAM and OM that have the medical ships that travel to developing countries. It can be the establishment of hospitals in developing countries. One of our past students from East London Bible Training Center is now in Malawi, in Blantyre, and he runs a hospital there, an orthopedic hospital for children in Malawi. It can be famine and disaster relief. It can be disaster relief for things like hurricanes and tsunamis and earthquakes. It can be disaster relief for things like famines that cause devastation over a period of years or even decades in parts of the world. It can be refugee care and accommodation. That is a huge need and issue in the northern part of Africa at this particular time. When I was in Vietnam, it was a huge issue. It was a huge issue in Southeast Asia because so many people were fleeing North Vietnam, and there were refugee camps in Cambodia and Laos and South Vietnam. It can be clean water projects. There are so many ways to be involved in humanitarian aid through providing clean water, and it's one of the most powerful things that the West can do, is to help people in developing countries have clean water. Orphan care, another huge issue. Things are getting better in the realm of orphan care because we're learning how to do it better, and also because AIDS is being brought under control, especially in Central and Eastern African countries. The treatment that's available now is helping people to survive and live longer, and so there are fewer orphans requiring care. So humanitarian aid, that's one of the things. So when we're thinking about missions, if you just think of those things I talked to you about there, that's huge. If we thought about it and prayed about it, and God stirred us to be involved in one of those things, then that's step number one. Then you got to figure out where and how and with whom you're going to do those things. And that's not only for us as a church, but that's for each of us who is being stirred, who's being pulled by the Holy Spirit to look outward and be more aware of the needs in the world around us. So, humanitarian aid. The second I'll mention is education and equipping. Basic education, just providing schools, either resourcing established schools or going into developing countries and establishing schools. Primary schools is normally where you would start. Another is skills training and resourcing. Teaching people teaching women how to sew, teaching men farming techniques, which leads us into agriculture and economic development. One of the powerful things that Western ministries are doing is going into countries and helping the people who are unemployed and unemployable start micro businesses, start a little business, helping them buy a goat, helping them buy some chickens, helping them buy seed to plant, and giving them some of the tools to work with so that they can become self-sufficient. So that's another very effective thing. Technology development. Technology is sweeping through the undeveloped part of our world. There are probably almost as many cell phones per capita in East Africa as there are in the Western United States. And along with that, there are so many things that we can do if we go in, like on short-term missions trips, if we can find ways to, because with that is computers. They have more stable electricity supplies, so more and more people are using computers. And it can be hugely helpful if people who are part of a short-term missions team can go and take maybe even the major part of their time there working with local people, helping them with computer skills, and taking along some good antivirus software and cleaning up people's computers. There's so much we can do in the realm of technology development. Christian education, that includes Bible college, seminary, Bible training centers. It includes providing resources to local churches so that they can teach their people so that people don't have to go away to a Bible school, but that they can be taught and trained in the basics of Christianity and basic doctrine, basic leadership skills right in their own villages and local churches. Bible translation. You know, one of the things, this is probably a little less applicable now, but it's still going on. There are, I think I've got some stats here. There are 6,700 to 7,000 languages spoken in the world today. And fortunately, all of those can be condensed into groups that represent somewhere around 100 written languages. But there are still some languages that don't have a written Bible in their language or dialect. And so there is still huge work to do, and it's so much more effective now with the software that we have that can aid with translation and all of that. But if anyone, see, you just never know how God is going to put his hand on someone in a group like this, and you may end up following the direction of the Holy Spirit and end up somewhere doing Bible translation someday, because that's still a valid need. And interestingly, I learned this when I was in Vietnam. The Vietnamese had a spoken language, but they didn't have a written language until a French Catholic priest came there in the 17th century and lived in, went from village to village, learned the language, and then actually developed a written language for Vietnam. And then because of that, they were able to have the Bible translated into their language. So they're just all of in terms of education and equipping. And then there's evangelism. Evangelism. There are 11,342 people groups, specifically identifiable people groups in the world today. 11,342, or it could be 343. There are 6,422 unreached people groups in the world today. More than half of the people groups in the world today still fall into the category of being unreached. That means there are 2% or fewer Christians in their population. And that's with 196 countries. We have literally of another culture, and you might not even have to have a passport. Well, you would have to eventually. In fact, get your passport if you don't have one. But you could go to San Francisco, or Los Angeles, or Chicago, or Mobile, Alabama, or any of 100 cities across the United States, and find people groups that are essentially unreached by the gospel, meaning that there are fewer than 2% of them who would be considered Christians. People groups, evangelism. And one of the things that we have to think about with evangelism is that see how to say this. Usually, people like you and me are not the most effective evangelists with people who don't look and think like you and me. And so usually our most effective method of evangelism is to find a few individuals, lead them to Christ, lead them in discipleship, and let them do evangelism among their own people. Now, it hasn't always been that way, but we kind of are stuck in the mode of how it's been before in some cases. And so, without this even implying any criticism, for white people to go to a country where people's skin is a different color primarily, where the language is different and the culture is different, and for us to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in huge evangelistic crusades where people are gathered and preached to is not really the most effective method of evangelism. In fact, when we lived in Jamaica, there were groups from the U.S. that would come down because it made great fundraising promotional videos. If they could come down and be videoed standing in front of a crowd of thousands of black-skinned people, they could use those videos to raise huge amounts of money back in the United States. But the thing is, one of them would come in January and do the big crusade, and then somewhere around June, someone else would come in and do the same kind of crusade in the same national arena with pretty much the same people attending as attended the last ones, because it was mostly Christians that attended those things. You know what I'm saying? But if we go in and reach some people and help them plant a church and get them to discipling people, then it can have lasting, long-lasting fruit and eternal significance. So church planting networks. And you know that there are a lot of missionaries from other countries coming to the United States right now to work among their own people groups in our larger cities. And so we need to think about how we might partner in some instances. If there's a particular people group that our hearts are stirred towards, we can do a little research, and Google is a tremendous tool for doing some of that research, as well as a network of personal contacts. But we can find missionaries from other countries working among other people groups here in the U.S. and can partner with them. Leadership development. Pastors and leaders courses and seminars. We have a guy in our church named Stephen Hacker. I just had an email from him this morning. He's in Botswana, and he is doing, he's just finished a one-week training with a group of national leaders, and now he started today with another week of training, and he's taking leadership methods to people of developing countries, but he's also taking his personal faith in Jesus Christ along with that. He's powerfully effective in that, and he's just what you might call a lay person here in our local church. I read a blog post by a guy named Ken Blanchard. He's pretty well known in leadership development circles, and he's part of a team of people that are working in Saudi Arabia, one of the most dangerous places on earth for Christians. And yet, because they work in leadership development, they work with government and business, and they carry their personal Christian faith with them in their work in those countries in leadership development. One of the things that's different over the past few years, and we noticed the changes taking place when we lived in Jamaica, and I'll tell you a little bit about why that happened. Jamaica is part of the British Commonwealth. Jamaica was a colony, and Jamaica got independence in 1962. So then from 1962 on, Jamaica began to be responsible for self-government. Still part of the British Commonwealth, but huge responsibility. And a lot of missionaries in that era, from the late 60s on, went to Jamaica and represented denominations like the Methodists and several brands of Baptists and Presbyterians and Foursquare and Assembly of God. And so there were strong networks of churches in Jamaica representing and supported by those denominations back in the U.S. and Canada. But what happened is that during the early 70s, down into the late 70s and early 80s, because of Jamaica's proximity to Cuba, and because communism was really a strong and powerful force, Jamaica began to turn towards communism, and it had several years a communist-oriented government. And the missionaries, most of them, had to leave unless they could kind of go underground and have a sort of a non-spiritual reason for being there, then they could stay. But what happened is that the leaders of all these denominational networks had to leave Jamaica, and they had not trained Jamaican leaders to do the work. And so when they had to suddenly leave, it just fell apart. These denominations collapsed. The denominations that were relatively strong and effective, that had dozens of churches, just within a couple of years had no leadership at all, and moral failure, all sorts of things, because they were dependent on leadership expertise from outside, and they were dependent on finances from outside. And so one of the things we have to be thinking about when we do our work in other parts of the world, when we partner with people, and when we initiate things, we have to be thinking about sustainability. Because there are so many unpredictables. Economics is an unpredictable. Politics is an unpredictable. There are just so many factors that we have to think about that make it so important that from the very beginning we're thinking in terms of sustainability. And maybe at another time we'll talk a little more about that, because we've encountered that in humanitarian aid in Africa. We've seen that in orphan care in Malawi, and we've got some great stories and some almost horror stories about what happens when we don't work towards long-term sustainability. Okay, a couple of things on local outreach, and then we're going to take our next step here. Here are some types of local outreach that we, in fact, I think these are all things that we're involved in now, and you would probably think of some other things that in the future we might be looking towards. Feeding the hungry, reaching out to the foster care community, ministering to the homeless, assisting our community partners, and participating in iHeart campaigns, like the one that Jenna spoke to us about a few minutes ago. And then I want to touch on two more things, and then we're going to move to the next, to our next point here. We have to think in terms of developing a missions philosophy. Is this stuff making sense to you guys?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. We have to think in terms of, are we going to go in and do our own thing and be responsible for owning it and funding it and sustaining it and dealing with the unexpecteds that come up? Or are we going to be open to partnership, where we go in and find other things that are already being done, that are in harmony with what God has put in our own hearts, that we can partner with, and we can provide support and help and encouragement? But if something were to happen that we had to withdraw temporarily, it wouldn't all collapse and fall apart. Now, I've kind of weighted that statement, but I've weighted it because of this one important factor. Everybody likes to have control. We always want to be in control. Well, in order to have control, you pretty much have to own the thing. So we have to decide whether we are willing to yield some control and be very careful in how we align our partnerships. And instead of controlling everything, if we go in to serve and support and encourage. Does that part make sense? Okay. And some things we have to own them. Some things are vision that God has put in our own heart. It's a very specific thing, and God didn't tell someone else to do it. He told us to do it. So we have to carry the weight of it. We have to own it. We have to control it. But even on those things, if we are wise, and this is for us as a church, but it's also for every one of us individually in the things that we get involved in. If we're wise, even on those things that we have ownership of, we will be looking for partnerships, and we will be looking for shared leadership and development on the things. Okay, I can't remember. I didn't bring a copy of the handout notes with me, but I have two sets of questions here. One is a set of questions that helps us corporately to decide on a missions philosophy and focus. And then the other set of questions is individual questions for thought and discussion. Did I print both of those in the notes? Great. Okay, so this first set of questions, I'm just going to read through them, but these are the kinds of things that we as a church think about, pray about, discuss, investigate when we're trying to decide where we're going to put our effort and our energy in missions. These sorts of things. Number one, most important of all, what did Jesus tell us to do? What's our specific mission and vision? Pastor Steve is with us, and in just a couple moments he's going to talk to us about a couple of those things. And of huge importance, what do we do well? If we ain't got it working at home, why should we think that we can export it to somebody else? You know? What do we do well? What do we have to offer? What are the needs? Sometimes the real need is not what we perceive as the need, and we need to listen, learn, observe. And here's an important thing. Where do we find our heart returning again and again and again? What's the sort of thing that just is like a magnetic pull that just keeps, and that can be a place, it can be a people, it can be a type of ministry. And this is hugely important. What relationships do we have? What are the what's the relationship network that God's placed us in? Thinking about things like working primarily in rural areas or urban areas. That a lot of that has to do with sustainability. And are we to be ministry owners or ministry resourcers? And then if we have a little time at the end today, we're going to take some time at our tables and a little discussion. And when we get to that point, we're going to talk about these questions. I'll just read through these again very quickly. Individual questions. What are the needs that stir me most? What can I do to learn more about the needs and how I can fit in? What do I have to offer? And you may not know what you have to offer, so talk to some folks who know you, that probably see things in you that you're not even aware of yourself. What relationships do I have that may influence my missions philosophy and focus? And how can I prepare to be most effective in my response? So that's a whole bunch of stuff. And I've just backed the dump truck up and dumped the whole load on you. But that's for thought and for a little bit further development. So Jenna's going to come and take a couple of minutes now, and then Pastor Steve's going to come and talk to us.
Thank you. Can you thanks? I promise I am only going to take a few minutes, but I had something on my heart to share with you this morning, and I was trying to think, how does it all work with, in light of what Jim just shared? You know, he's sharing foundation and history and the big picture. And as we discussed last week, our heart as a Beyond team is to help people find their fit. And I feel like what Jim was giving you is a lot to really think over, and I encourage you, even as you go home, to read through those questions again and really think, God, what is it that you're asking me to do? What are the things you've stirred in me already? But for me, when I sit through something like that, I get the big picture. I'm guessing you got the big picture. You know, what missions is, how it's shifting, and all of those pieces. But I think something that's important for me to do all the time is to ask then, okay, if I'm looking towards the future and what God's calling me to, and we're all in the process at different places of sorting that out. My question I ask all the time is, what's something I can do today? I'm kind of one of those, like, can we move forward kind of people. And I have something that might seem funny to you. I know people have always asked me that question. If I want to be a missionary or I want to go on a trip, what should I do? And I asked people that as well when I was going through the process. And people would say things like read books about the culture or start praying. And those are practical steps, and those are awesome. But I felt like what God wanted me to speak with you this morning about is that what you do, whether it's here or overseas, will flow out of who you are. So the most practical thing you can do is let the Holy Spirit work on who you are. And that's a really seemingly basic thing. Again, Jim was talking about, our strategies, if they don't work in America, they're probably not going to work overseas. And the same thing then if you take a step back and look at your own heart. Who you are, again, this is going to sound funny, but who you are in America, you'll be the same person overseas. You might be a wackier version, I can attest to that, but at the same time, if you have struggled or things that you're working on now, they don't disappear when you get overseas. They actually become highlighted, believe it or not. And so I felt like the Lord just wanted us to hear that this morning, that, again, it's a really simple principle, but the things that we do, whether it's relationships just here in Bend or ministry overseas, it's going to flow out of the core of who you are. And I just got this picture, I believe God spoke this to me a while ago, that if we think of our lives like a well, and what I can do today is allow the Holy Spirit to be depositing things in me. So what are the spiritual gifts He's given me? Let me practice those. Surround myself with people that challenge me to grow in those. What are talents that I have that I need to develop myself? Do I know how to hear the voice of the Lord? Because when I got overseas and I was in the midst of crazy circumstances, I didn't remember what the book said. I knew how to hear the Holy Spirit, and that's what helped me. That's what allowed me to do what God was calling me to do. And the other thing that goes along with that in tandem is that we need to be people of character. Ministry will not be sustained if our character can't hold the weight of it. And God is eager, I believe, eager to entrust us with His kingdom ministry, with His kingdom mission. And so from my heart, the only thing I can control in that is to take a step back and say, Holy Spirit, would you give me character? Would you give me what I need to sustain what you're entrusting to me? And so that's my practical thing for you today. It might seem kind of like left field, but to me, when I think about it, as we apply it to the big picture, that's what we should be doing today. You might not be ready to leave the country tomorrow, and that's okay. But what I found to be true is when I left the country and I went overseas, what I had deposited alone in my childhood bedroom even with the Lord, where I was praying and seeking the Lord, that is what the Lord drew upon when I was overseas. So why wouldn't we want our wells to be full? Amen? Amen. Amen. So I just want to encourage you with that. We get to develop those spiritual patterns now, and that, again, is what I said, is what equips me the most to be a missionary, was that I learned to hear His voice, I learned to love Him more, and to allow His Spirit to work in me. And this morning, we have an awesome privilege to have Pastor Steve Mickle with us. If for those of you that don't know, Steve and his wife served overseas in Croatia, and I don't remember how many years, but I'm sure he'll tell you. And so we just wanted to ask him a couple questions so you could get his perspective on missions, and really where, how it's led him to where he is now. So Steve, you can come forward as I'm asking the question, because I think you know the question, but you can welcome him. So my question, I guess, is in light of what I just said. that little thought is what I had, my experiences. Steve and I both actually were Foursquare missionaries, so we have a Foursquare family here, right? But that was something that stood out to me on the mission field, was really the patterns I established in the States, for good or bad, impacted then what transpired overseas. And so I'm just curious, in your time in Croatia, share whatever you desire, but what did that look like for you?
Thanks, Jenna. This is great. It's great that you guys are all here, by the way. I just love it. And, I can't reiterate what Jenna was saying more so. I mean, it's just so important. If you need, let me just say it this way, if you need a local church for your spiritual growth, you won't make it long-term on the mission field. It's a shocking statement. I believe in the local church. I believe wherever you go, wherever you end up, you should get connected to the local church. But if you need a local church for your spiritual development, you ain't going to make it. Let me give you a case in point. I walk into Croatia, and they don't speak English in the service. What? Okay, I don't know the language, and how am I going to grow spiritually? Here I am sitting in a 2-hour service, and it got old really, really fast, them translating everything to me. It got old really fast for us and for them. If you can imagine translating for 2 hours straight every weekend. So I understand what's going on. And even the translation, you're not getting it all. And so I quickly realized, I need something else. Oh, I'll just turn on the Christian radio station. Oh, they don't have any. Okay, I'll just read a book. Oh, they don't have any in English. right? So I had to figure out very quickly that I needed a vibrant, strong relationship with Jesus before I ever went, and then it was on me when I did go. So I think that character issue is huge, because I think you think, well, I just I'm not quite there yet, and you're like, no, you got to get there. You got to get there. You got to get to a place where you can skip church every once in a while and still be good with Jesus. I'm not encouraging you to do that, but I'm just saying that is an important deal. You know, Jenna said you speak out of who you are. It's so true. You speak out of who you are. If you're not evangelizing people here, you will not evangelize people over there. You don't get off the plane and all of a sudden this anointing comes on you and you're a different person and you wake up, oh man, maybe that might last for 2 weeks. But if you're there long term, it's just who you are here is who you will be on the mission field, without a doubt. If you're lame here, you're lame there. If you're great here, you're great there. It works that way. It works that way. Ron Mel told me once, be a prophet, not a parasite. You have to draw from someone else all the time to get words from God for other people. You got to get words from God yourself. You got to have a vibrant relationship with Jesus Christ, where He's downloading things to you personally. It's not just through a book, and it's not just through a preacher. It's things you're connected with Him, and it's going to flow out of that. Your effectiveness, short term, long term, it doesn't matter that it happens here. You'll be more effective here if you learn what Jesus' voice sounds like and you follow it and obey it completely. I won't tell that story. It's too long of a story. It's a pretty good one though, but I won't tell you. So anyways, I think that's it for that question. I think Jim was going to come up and ask me a couple other questions. Just like, okay, I got to get with Jesus. Yeah. I got to get with Jesus. Whatever, and that doesn't matter whether you want to do missions or not. It's whatever you want to do in life. Get with Jesus. Let everything that happens through you flow out of your relationship with Him. And you'll make it. You'll make it in any endeavor you do, because of that vibrant relationship with God. That He's the one feeding you. He's the one energizing you. He's the one refreshing you. It doesn't come through worship. I can't wait until I get to worship. You sit in a 3-hour worship service in Africa. It will not energize you. It doesn't. It will sap the strength out of you, because you're American. You're not used to it. It's not part of your culture. You've got to understand how to get renewed in your spirit by your relationship with Jesus Christ. And you can make it. You can make it with that. So, Jim, why don't you come on up and let's keep dialoguing.
Thanks, Pastor Steve. A couple of things. What's your practical step? The stuff that Jenna and Pastor Steve just said to you about your personal growth, being responsible for your personal spiritual growth. What's your practical step? What's 1 or 2 things that you're going to write down on your paper that you're going to do to take those steps forward in that? I have another question for Pastor Steve. Westside has a great history of missions involvement. We've been involved in missions within the Foursquare denomination. We currently support missionaries around the world, and we support Foursquare missions. But the difference is with Steve becoming our lead pastor at Westside, and with Pastor Steve having lived overseas as a missionary, I'm asking him to talk to us about how that might influence how we do missions here at Westside Church. Is that okay?
Yes. Yeah. I think it's extremely important that we realize that for me, this is just a personal thing. It's not for everybody. It's not for every church, but I believe it's for me and for us as a community of faith here at Westside, is that everything for me flows out of the local church. It's a local church ministry based. I believe the healthiest movements around the world flow out of the local church. And what does that mean? What does that look like? You might be into, maybe a guy calls you to basket weaving in Mexico. That's your thing. God has asked you to do that. And you come to Westside and you say, hey, I want to go weave baskets in Mexico. And Jenna will look at you and go, that is awesome. Are you sure God's called? Yeah, I'm absolutely positive. Are you absolutely sure? Yes, I'm absolutely. Okay, let's help you get there. And we'll help you get to Mexico to weave baskets. Will we pay for you to get there? No, probably not. We might throw a little bit at you if we can, but we probably aren't going to get full on. Are we going to start telling the church about the basket weaving ministry we have in Mexico? Probably not. The reason we, and I'm going to show you a picture in just a second, but the reason we do that is I believe that local church ministry in a local context is the most effective way to reach the people. So you say, hey, I want to weave baskets, but I don't want to just weave baskets. I want to start a church of basket weavers. Oh, now you've got our attention. Because you want to reproduce something, not just baskets. You want to reproduce, which I believe happens in a local church, leaders and pastors and ministers that are reaching then their culture. Because I believe that long-term missions will always be an important part. Jenna was a long-term missionary. I was a long-term missionary. I believe that's an important part. But it's becoming, because of globalization, you don't have to move overseas and give 10 years of your life to missions anymore. You can, and Brent Ehrwicker is a great example of someone that God has placed that calling on. But you can be very, very effective in this world, going in 2 weeks at a time. And I have a friend down in California, Aptos, California, and he has been doing missions for 20-some years, and he has helped launch church planting movements in the Netherlands and in Switzerland. Only doing it, going 2 weeks, 3 times a year. And now there's movements of churches planted because they didn't send any long-term missionaries. So I think we got to kind of rethink how we do missions in light of globalization. We've got to think, okay, let's ask questions that maybe we haven't been asking for a really long time. Is this the most effective way to do that? Is there a better way to reach our mission? Now I need a few volunteers. Can one person volunteer here real quick? Just somebody. I am going to call you forward. Josh Grace, come on up. Josh is a missionary in Mexico with his family. Welcome, Josh. Josh, good to have you here. Josh, I want you to stand right here. And Josh is the epitome of our mission and vision at Westside Church of what God has asked us to do. We're going to plant churches. We're going to develop leaders. We're going to reach into countries and cultures and people groups that are not reached yet with the gospel of Jesus Christ through church planting and leadership development. He is the epitome of that vision. All right? Now I need another volunteer. Anybody? All right? John, come on up. So John's the basket weaver. John, come on over here, and you're the basket weaver. And John, I want you to turn your body this way, and I want you to face just like that. I need another volunteer. Oh, come on, you guys. All right, Josh, come on up. Got a couple Joshes here. That's good. Josh, I want you to stand this way. No, turn around. There you go. Just like that. I want you to stand and look that way, not right at Josh. I need one more person. Anybody? Doesn't matter. Anybody? Just one more person. Okay, yes. We've got a brave person. Come on up. What's your name? Terry. Hi, Terry. And Terry is going to stand right here in the middle looking straight at Josh. And just let me describe this picture to you. If I had a whiteboard, I'd just draw it and wouldn't embarrass these people as much as I am. Now, remember who Josh is, right? He is our mission and vision that God has called us to, Westside Church, okay? And Terry, she wants to go plant churches in Uganda. I mean, just lines up with it. That is great. We're all behind Terry. We'll fund you. We'll send you. We'll pray for you. We'll put you on that big Beyond wall. I mean, when you come, you'll preach. I mean, all of that stuff. Pretty exciting. You're pretty excited, aren't you? Yeah, that's exciting for you. Now, Josh over here. Josh he wants to plant a church in Indonesia. Man, Indonesia. Josh, we're not in Indonesia right now. We're in Uganda, Australia, and Mexico. But you want to plant churches. You see, he's going, right? He's going in that direction, right? Of our vision. And we'll say, all right, Josh, good. We're glad you're doing that. And then John over here, he's the basket weaver, man. He is pointed in the opposite direction. Now, when I came five years ago, if you weren't Terry, you were out. We didn't know what to do with the Johns and the Joshes. We had so what we would do is we just kind of like, sorry, brother, sorry. And there was no place for them in our mission vision as a church. Am I right, Jim? I mean, we had to be focused. We had to be. I mean, we didn't have staff to care for all of these missionaries, and we didn't have time to highlight every single one of the ministries that were being birthed out of people at Westside, right? We had a men's group one time, sorry you guys are going to stand up here longer. We had a men's group one time that said we want to help, we want to build a habitat house. A men's group said we want to build a habitat house. And they said right after they said that, they said, but we don't want it to be Westside. And I thought, what's up with that? I don't understand that. I don't care if stuff's called Westside or not, but why did they make a point of saying we don't want it to be Westside? Anybody want to guess why they said that? We didn't want Westside to control what God told us to do. And I totally understood it. I got it. Because what Jim was saying earlier about control, this missions, oh my goodness. It's about control. So often you see it's about control. And so people were like, God was birthing vision. Is God birthing vision in you? I mean, God is asking you to do things. He's dropping seeds of thoughts, and you're going, oh my goodness, how is this going to work? Right? And then, now if I come to my church, will they try to change my vision? Will they try to give me, here, Josh, you're so into Indonesia. I know you are, but go to Uganda. Go to Uganda. He's like, no, it's Indonesia. Why should we come along and say, no, sorry, you have to go to Uganda or Australia or Mexico? And he's thinking, Australia? My God. He's thinking Indonesia. He is committed, vision. Now, John over here, he's into basket weaving. Right? Now, what if we say no to John? And 5 years from now, I mean, we say no to him, he leaves Westside. By the way, that's what happens. He leaves Westside, he finds a church that is into basket weaving, and they send him. 5 years later, he's got 50 churches that are into basket weaving, and he comes back to Westside and says, hey, you guys, my heart's always been here. This is my church family. I got saved here. And we find out he's doing 50 churches. What are we going to do? Well, come on back into the family, John. It's like, wait a second. So what we're doing now as a church is we're saying, as best as we can, we're putting our hands on men and women and saying, go do what God has asked you to do. And we will be behind you. We will support you. We're not sure how much we can support you. We're not sure how much we can get you in front of the church. We're not sure about all that stuff. But what we're not going to do is cut you out and the vision that God's given you. We're going to say, let's help each other do what God has asked you to do. And what we found, what we used to be scared of, is that if we didn't have Terrys just everywhere, Joshes and the Johns, we always thought they took momentum away from this. Right? We thought, well, if we get behind Josh going to Indonesia, it's going to take away from this. And what we've realized is that because we sent Josh to Indonesia and people heard about it, they get excited and they step into this whole thing. And that creates momentum for this. It does support this indirectly. All right, thank these guys for staying with me for so long. I feel like a visual picture was important for you guys to see that as we move forward, as God drops things into your hearts, we're not guaranteeing anything. Okay, we're not saying we're gonna do everything we can for Terry, we're gonna do for you. We're not saying that, but what we're not saying anymore is that there's no place for you here. So our missions vision is expanding at the same time as we're staying very, very committed to our DNA, which is planting churches and developing leaders. And it's not glamorous. It's not glamorous. Supporting orphanages are glamorous, and I'm not opposed to orphanages, but this is what I believe solidly, the core of my being from the years of experience in missions, is that the best people to care for orphans are healthy local churches. I believe that. I believe that. I think that because it's long-lasting. Jim used the word sustainable. What's sustainable? Local churches last. They do. And if they get a vision and a heart for caring for the orphans, for the foster kids, then there will be an established ministry even after the missionary leaves. Because every one of them leave. It's inevitable. Grandkids come along, you're gone. I mean, you might last your whole life, but that moment, that's it. Grandkids trump vision. I've learned that. Grandkids trump vision. But it's just and so what happens if everything that's built in a country is on a missionary's back? It's not healthy. But if everything is built on a local church's back, that's pastored by local people, it's going to last. It's going to last forever, potentially. So, anyways, Jim, did you have another question for me, or was that kind of it?
That's kind of it. Anything else you want to tell us?
Yeah. Do you guys have any questions for me about where we're headed in missions as a local church?
Where are we headed?
Yeah, well, I'm very committed to Uganda with Brent and Virginia Earwicker. As long as they're in Uganda, we will be committed to Uganda. I feel very strongly about that. I have to keep on reiterating, I want them at the top of our support list, just because what's in their heart is in my heart, and the match, the connection is strong there. So I think we continue to be involved in Uganda.
Can you tell about what happened with them this week?
Yeah, so the container got there, and it was great, and we were all excited, and then it got delivered to Brent's house, but they didn't unload it off the truck because the paperwork wasn't filed properly by some company, and so they took the trailer back, the container back to the dock, and then Brent had to get some paperwork finished. He was driving to the dock to get it released, had all the money, his laptop, Bible, and traffic. Anyways, in traffic, somebody came, got his attention as he was driving. The buddy opened up the other door window or something and grabbed the bag of money. So $4,000 was stolen from Brent, and so he was just like devastated. And so we just, there was a guy on staff that wrote an email to me, and a couple other people said, is there anything we can do? And so we looked at where we were financially in our missions fund, and we said, let's do it. So we just got the money back to him and reimbursed that. So I think he'll have the container soon. So praise God for that. Another thing that happened with Brown, I was so excited about, he has this island ministry, and there's just, I've been on 2 of the islands there, and there's just so much need. Isn't that the truth in missions? You just look around and keep your eyes open, because there's needs here too, right? That's the great thing about doing God's work, is there's needs everywhere. But on the islands, there's just so many needs, and Brent was getting tired trying to figure out how to get to all the islands. There's almost 200 of them, and they all need help. There's got pastors that are living in sin. They've got just they're teaching error. I mean, it's just not good. And so Brent's trying to get to all these places himself. Well, just a couple weeks ago, he laid hands on 5 local men and women and anointed them, and they are now leaders, regional leaders over the islands. And so he has the islands all grouped into 5 sections, 5 regions, and he's investing into those 5. You see how that works? And so what he realized on our last trip that I was there with him, he was like, Brent, you're not going to last doing it the way you're doing it. And you're not going to be in Uganda your whole life. So what are you doing right now to make sure that what God has done through you these last 6 years will continue on? And he thought, well, I've got these leaders. And I said, well, take the next step. What do you need to do with them? I need to empower them. Empower them. Get them going. And so he's now got these guys. And so that's the stuff that really gets me excited, and that we come alongside and we say, as a church, we want to support. And so I think that's the biggest area for me, is where we're headed, as well as I just believe that there's, that more and more people are going to want to go on missions trips. And we need to figure out, Jim is really working hard at trying to figure out teams that we can send, some that are closer, some that are far away, so that we give as many people possible an opportunity to experience a cross-cultural ministry opportunity, just to, wake you up to the reality out there. By the way, this is going to sound, some of you are going to get mad at me. I love America.
Amen.
Okay, I said it, I do. But do not take your American Christianity to another part of the world. It will not work. I remember I was in Athens, and I was on top of Old Corinth. So I was in Greece, on top of Old Corinth, near Athens. And I got a phone call from a guy in Norway who was watching the news on September 11th, 2001, and he told me about the towers. So I rushed to get on a plane so I could get home with Suzanne. It rocked us overseas as well, not as much as it did you guys here, but it rocked us So I'm in the airport getting on a plane, and I get a text from our Croatian friend that I've been working with for a few years, and just a close guy, and he tells me a joke. I mean, it's the same day it's happened. He says, what do you call, what's the new slogan for American Airlines, I think he said. We take you right to your office. The same day. I was like, what's wrong with you? I was like, what's wrong with you? And then they said, well, we're glad it happened because you guys need to know what it's like. It's like, what's wrong with you people, And then I told them I voted for the first George Bush, and they were like appalled. How could you do that? See, listen, if you take, wherever you land on the spectrum politically, if you take that with you, you are cutting your effectiveness in half. Because you will find yourself wanting to defend this nation, and you don't need to. You will find yourself wanting to do something inside of you because you were born here and grew up here, even if you don't agree. You might even agree with the person that's slamming America, but something will rise up in you and you'll be like, that as a missionary will decrease your effectiveness. You have to put that stuff aside. You have to learn how to be an alien, a foreigner. You have to embrace the scriptures that Paul talks about, being a foreigner in this land. I am a kingdom citizen. I happen to have been born in America, but I am a kingdom citizen, and I operate by kingdom principles. And our nation isn't always gone by kingdom principles, right? And so be honest and have open eyes to see how you grew up and how that has impacted your own theology, because it'll be challenged when you go overseas. And I think Jenna will always talk with short-term teams. We always talk to them about how do you talk about your nation, how do you interact. We're really loud. Did you know that? I didn't know this. We're like really loud people. I mean, I'm not. But we're like, and so you can always, if you spend any time overseas, you can always spot an American. Always. Yeah, let's not be that. Seriously, let's just not be that. Well, that's who we are. Oh, I'm so glad Jesus didn't do that. And he took on human flesh and identified himself with us. And people even wondered if he was the Son of God because he so identified himself with us. Something for us to learn for sure. Somebody else had a question? Yeah.
Is Westside Church going to offer international, multi-generational short-term mission trips?
It's a great question. I think so. Jenna, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it depends on where we're going.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's easier to do that locally here in the U.S. Like the Madisons took some family trips up to Washington and the Hispanic community. It's a little easier to do that. Maybe in Mexico it might be easier as well, more cost-effective to take kids and youth. But I think we do want to do that. We do want to do that. I think it's just having people have a vision for it that say, hey, I want to step up and lead in those areas, I think is important. But yeah, it's something that's important to do.
What I'd like to know, because I'm kind of drawn to a couple of areas, but what drew you to wanting to go to Croatia where you don't speak the language? I mean, you're going in there totally raw.
Yeah, well, there's a couple things. One is a calling. I heard a voice from God, so to speak. So that was huge. That was driving it. And then we had a choice of a couple different places to go to, and we picked Croatia because of what I just kind of described to you about our vision and passion matched with theirs. And so for me, it's never been like my dad woke up one night weeping for Kenya. He had to go to Kenya. I mean, that's like a pretty clear sign. I mean, it was just really connected with him. But for us, it was really just what is that country doing, and does it match with our vision and passion and heartbeat? And so for us, it was a voice from God saying, get involved in missions first, and then when it came to where, for us, it wasn't as important as what. What is that country trying to do? What are the people they're trying to do? Is our giftings a match for that? And so that's kind of how we did it. There's different ways to do that, but I would always encourage you to not get hung up on place, on locations, as much as possible, because you can be used wherever, anywhere. You can be used, your giftings and strengths.
So when you were over there, what did you guys do? I mean, were you training leaders or? Pretty
much a long vacation. It was just, yeah. Yeah, we systemize. Yeah. So we worked with the local people, and you know, some people encouraged us to go plant a church, and we just felt like we needed to invest in relationship with the locals. And so this was the hardest transition for us because Croatia is a very. Is this being recorded? It's a very okay. It's
we can
processing the words I use. Let me just say this: they will go work from 8 or 9 until about 2, and then they take a siesta phase. And you're going like, what, are they doing anything? Do they, you know, how do they have income? So we had to realize that leadership development for us had to be done differently. It's not getting them into a classroom. It's not doing this. This is foreign to them, having something like this. It had to be around a coffee table. And that was actually hard for me. It sounds really great, but it was actually hard for me to just kind of slow down, not have my little packet of materials that we walked through, but just to talk relationally with them. And so that's primarily what we did, is we just tried to, so one of my life goals is to help people realize what their life goals are and live them out. And so that, our conversations, what do you want to do with your life? Where are you going? Where's the church going? And so it's all about investing into those people there to help them do the work of ministry. Yeah, it was never about us, and that's weird, you know. But it's not. It's about people there.
We got a couple of minutes. We want to finish up here just about 10:30. Give you time to do whatever you need to do physiologically before we go into the 10:45 service, if that's your plan. So let me just wrap up with a couple of things here, and then we're going to ask you to take a few minutes at your table or kind of shuffle around so that there's about 4 of you talking. I want to just say a couple of things. It's about steps of action. It's not just about information. And so here are some things that I believe are important steps. We'll talk about these. We've got 2 more sessions coming up, one 2 weeks from now, and then one 2 weeks after that, where we'll be dealing with specifics. But let's get our thinking oriented now. Get a passport. If you're serious about this, get a passport. That's a step of faith. That's a step that will start pointing your thinking in a direction. Plus, it'll mean that you're ready to rock and roll if the opportunity comes up. The second thing is get out of debt. If you're in debt and you're serious about missions, whether you're serious about short-term missions or living overseas as a missionary, get out of debt. Because the money that you're paying out in credit card interest and other kinds of interest is money that could be used towards the kingdom of God. So get out of debt. We do Financial Peace University here at Westside Church. We repeat that at least once, maybe twice a year. And that'll give you some good tools for getting out of debt. And with the money that you're saving as you begin to get out of debt, start supporting missionaries. Westside sends money to missionaries, but you need to start supporting missionaries yourself. You can do that through Westside. You can support Westside missionaries through Westside by giving something extra every month, or you can support missionaries in other places doing other things. But that's sowing seed in the field where you want to reap the harvest. So start supporting missionaries. And then here's the other thing. In terms of short-term missions, commit to a short-term mission trip and raise the support yourself, not depending on anybody else. Westside will help you. Other agencies that you commit to doing a mission with, they'll help you with the fundraising, but let your faith empower you to raise the support for the mission that you're going to be involved in. Because when you're a missionary, whether short-term or long-term, just like Pastor Steve said, if you depend on the local church for your spiritual growth and maturity, you're not going to make it long. And in terms of missions involvement, if you depend on somebody else for the faith to generate the finances that makes it happen, it's just not going to work for you. So those are some practical to-do things. So remember, 2 weeks from today, back here in this room at the same time, we'll be doing our next session on this. So turn to other people at your table now, 4 of you at the table, or shift to another table where you can talk with someone. And on the sheet that you were handed, individual questions for thought and discussion. Individual questions. Somebody take the initiative in your discussion group there and start talking about any one of those that stirs your heart, and make sure that each person has a chance to do a little bit of the discussion. And then we can leave the room by around 10:30 or a few minutes after.
Before you go, if you could check your name off the list that you were here today, and if you missed last week, we have DVDs of the class that was last week, so just be sure and sign up for that.